The first time I saw her, the heat was already pressing down on Calico Reach like a heavy hand. The street lay near empty under the noon glare, boards creaking as a platform rose in the middle of town. Men hammered without hurry, the sound sharp against the still air. The mayor stood nearby, coat swinging open, speaking loud enough for the newspaper man who'd stepped off the stage the night before. Then they brought her out, hands chained, dress-torn wrists red where the iron had bitten. She didn't look at the crowd, not until her eyes found mine. I hadn't decided yet if I'd look away. Before I tell you what happened after, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to choose between staying silent or stepping forward. Go ahead and tap like and subscribe. I hadn't come to Calico Reach with any plans to wear a badge. My riding brought me down from the high country 2 months earlier with only a roan gelding my colt and a bedroll. Missouri had been home once, where I farmed good earth until the river flooded twice and took more than the fields. Folks there knew me as a man who kept his word, and I tried to live by what my father taught: be fair in trade, lend a hand when needed, speak plain, and keep your temper. Those ways fit well enough on the open range. But out here the rules bent for men with deep pockets and friends in the saloon. Calico Reach had been a mining camp in its day, then a stopover for freighters running between settlements. By the time I rode in, it was a string of sunburned buildings, one church with a leaning steeple, and a mayor who ran things by favor and fear. My place was a half-roofed cabin by the livery shingles, loose enough to let the wind whistle through at night. I spent the first weeks patching it with whatever scrap I could find. Folks kept their distance, and I didn't push to know them. The only law in town was the kind that kept the right people comfortable and left the rest to fend for themselves. The difference between my life back home and here was more than miles. On the farm, we counted every coin, mended tools, until the handles wore smooth, and measured each season by what the soil would give. Here money passed fast between gamblers, land speculators, and the railroad men buying up lots along the ridge. They built false fronts to hide empty rooms, sold promises to anyone green enough to believe. Men like Horner made sure their friends never saw the inside of a cell, no matter the harm they caused. I told myself I'd stay clear of all that, keep to my repairs work, the odd job, and be gone before winter. That was before the morning I saw the mayor's men building that platform, before they dragged Laney Greer out into the sun, and before her eyes met mine across that crowd. Something about the way she stood, tired but unbroken, made it clear this wasn't for justice. This was for show. I stayed where I was, leaning on the post outside the general store, until the hammering stopped and the crowd shifted closer. I didn't move when the mayor spoke over the heads of the townsfolk, his words rolling slick and easy. But when Laney's gaze held mine, and her lips formed something I almost didn't catch, the stillness in me turned. I knew then the choice I'd been trying to avoid wouldn't wait much longer. The mayor's words rolled across the street, his voice carrying above the hammering as if the crowd was a jury waiting to be convinced. The timber platform stood square in the center of the road, ropes hanging from its frame. His coat flared as he paced, gesturing for the newspaper man to keep close. The women toward the back kept their shawls, tight eyes fixed anywhere but the platform. Laney stood there with her shoulders back, wrists bound to the post. The iron had rubbed her skin raw, and the wind caught strands of her hair, pushing them across her face. She didn't speak, didn't lower her head. Then her eyes found mine again, and I caught the shape of her lips, soft, quick, but clear enough. "Please save me." I didn't answer, only held her gaze a moment longer before turning away. As the afternoon dragged on, the heat grew heavier, pressing down until the air itself seemed to stand still. A bottle shattered against the boards near her feet, the echo snapping across the quiet. But she didn't flinch. By sundown, the crowd thinned, leaving only a few men leaning against the saloon railing, their voices low. When the last of them wandered off, I left my post outside the store and walked the side alley to where the shadows ran long. The boards under my boots gave no warning as I stepped onto the platform. She didn't speak, didn't move as I took the key from my coat and worked the lock. The cuffs fell open, her arms dropping to her sides. She swayed but caught herself before she fell. I set a blanket around her shoulders and placed a canteen in her hand. "Come on," I said, my voice even. We left the street behind, cutting past the church with its leaning steeple, the closed-up barber's shop, and the line of hitching posts empty now. The lanterns in town had gone out. My cabin sat just past the livery, its porch boards creaking under our steps. Inside, the light from a single lantern caught the edges of the table and the cot in the corner. A wash basin sat clean on the shelf, firewood stacked neat near the hearth. I gestured for her to sit, then stepped back outside. She stood a long moment before following. I stayed on the porch, rifle across my knees, the wind picking up grit from the road and carrying it against the walls like a soft, steady tapping. The night passed with only the sound of wind and the occasional pop of the cooling roof. Once I stepped inside to leave a folded shirt and a washcloth by the basin. She hadn't spoken since we left the platform. Hours later, I heard water move in the basin and the quiet scrape of cloth. When I came in again, she was wearing the shirt, its sleeves hanging loose. I set a pot of stew on the table, ladled it into a bowl, and slid it toward her. She sat without a word, eating slow, her eyes down. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. Why I set down the piece of leather I'd been trimming. "I saw what they did," I told her. "Didn't think it was right." She glanced up. "You barely know me." "Didn't have to," I said. She let the spoon rest in the bowl, turning it once. What now? I told her the mayor would know she was gone by morning, but I didn't think they'd come that night. And if they do?" she asked. "Then I'll deal with it." She shook her head slightly. "You'll get yourself killed." I met her eyes. Been close before. We didn't speak much after that. When the fire burned low, I handed her a small tin of salve for her wrists. She didn't ask why I was sleeping outside, only nodded when I stepped to the porch again. I sat with the rifle across my lap until the gray light of morning touched the hills. She woke slow, blinking, as if the quiet inside the cabin felt unfamiliar. Her hands moved to fold the shirt she'd worn through the night, setting it neatly on the bench. Outside, I split wood in the cold air, sleeves rolled the steady rhythm, filling the space between us. She came to stand at the edge of the porch. "I can help," she said. I handed her the smaller axe, no more words needed. Her first swings glanced off the grain, but by the fourth strike, the log split. We worked without talking until our arms were tired. When we set the axes aside, I poured 2 mugs of coffee, dark and without sugar. The steam curled between us, and the cabin felt less like a place for one. That's when the knock came, 3 short raps, not loud, but sure. I moved to the door hand, brushing the butt of my Colt. Deputy Caleb Cross stood there, hat in hand, eyes shifting past me. "Heard she's gone from the platform," he said. "Mayor's angry, wants her found before sundown." I asked him if he saw her here. "No, sir," he answered too quickly. "Didn't say I came to search. Just passing the word." When I closed the door, Lainey was still at the table, her hands tight in her lap. "He'll come back," she said. I told her to let him. "I don't want you in trouble over me," she added. "You didn't ask for this." "I made the choice," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "You could have kept walking that night." I leaned back in the chair. "I don't help people for owing," I told her. "And I don't take orders from men who use rope for control." She held my gaze. "You think you can stop what's coming?" "I don't aim to run," I said. As the day wore on, she moved about the cabin, sweeping the floor, folding my shirts, boiling water. She paused once behind my chair, eyes catching on the thin scar under my chin, but didn't ask. That night I stayed on the porch again, the wind carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere in the dark, a decision was already moving toward us. By morning, the sky was a low gray, carrying the smell of rain and cold iron. I stepped off the porch early, scanning the tree line before crouching to check the nails in the front steps. The air held that still waiting kind of silence before a storm. Inside, Lainey moved slow but steady, folding the blanket from the cot, then sweeping the floor again. Her wrists were healing, though the marks still showed. She worked without hurry, the way someone does when they're trying to put a little order back into their hands. I came in with a bundle of kindling and a wrapped piece of jerky. "You sleep at all?" I asked without turning. "Some," she answered. I nodded toward the window. "Storm's coming, might last a day or two." She glanced at me over her shoulder. "Does that make things harder?" "Harder for them to track," I said. "But if they come, they'll use it as cover." She didn't need me to say who they were. We sat down to eat, splitting the jerky and bread. Between bites, she asked, "Do you trust that deputy?" I rinsed my hands in the basin before answering. "Cross is young, thinks more than he talks." "That can be dangerous, but he's not cruel. I don't think he'll tell them I'm here." She nodded, eyes fixed on the plate in front of her. We ate in silence, both of us listening to the creak of the boards and the push of the wind outside. When the meal was done, she took up a needle and thread from a small box by the stove, mending a tear in one of my shirts. I moved to the door hinges with a tin of oil, working them until they swung without complaint. The quiet between us wasn't strained. It just was. By afternoon, I brought in 2 sacks from the shed flour and dried apples and set them near the hearth. "Mayor's men might come tonight," I said, "or tomorrow." She stood in front of me, close enough for me to see the set of her jaw. "They won't stop until they've made an example out of me. You know that." I nodded. "I know." "And you're willing to face them?" she asked. "I didn't pull you down off that platform just to let them chain you again." Her voice dropped. "I can't fight. I'm not asking you to," I told her. Our eyes met for the first time in hours, hers carrying something stronger than fear now. She stepped forward and kissed me, brief and quiet. When she pulled back, she said, "Sorry." "You don't have to be," I replied. By dusk, the rain had started light at first, then steadier. I stood on the porch, rifle close at hand, watching the road disappear into mist. Inside, Lainey sat near the fire, the blanket around her shoulders, working another seam. She didn't seem to be thinking about running anymore. The rain deepened through the night, soaking the ground, until by morning, the cabin sat in a shallow pocket of mud and mist. I had stayed awake more than I slept, keeping to the window when the wind rattled the panes. Lainey rose early too, making coffee and stepping out to the lean-to to see to the mule. She moved stiff from the cold, but without hesitation. While she stirred cornmeal over the fire, she asked without looking up, "What if they try something you can't stop?" I scratched at my jaw, watching the curtain of rain outside. "Then we deal with it," I said. She looked over her shoulder. Together, I glanced her way. "Yeah, together." It was the first time I'd said we. We finished breakfast, listening to the cabin creak and a crow calling out in the trees. Then she said, "Back in town, the mayor isn't working alone." I didn't answer. She went on, "It's not just about me. There are others like me, folks too afraid to speak. He threatens them with the same chains." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "I saw what kind of man he is." She nodded, then asked, "Do you know why he singled me out?" I waited. "I helped a girl," she said. "She was 13. A rancher's son hurt her. She came to me bruised and bleeding. I reported it. The mayor buried it. Next week, she and her mother were gone. No one said a word. I held her gaze, the silence between us heavier now. He didn't just want to punish me, she said. He wanted to show what happens when someone challenges the way things are. My jaw tightened. You did right. It didn't matter. I shook my head. It does now. We spent the day getting ready. I cleaned and oiled both rifles, laying them within reach. Lainey wrapped bullets in cloth and stored them under a loose board near the hearth. She checked the window latches, then tied a knife under the bench by the door. This wasn't fear moving us anymore. It was readiness. By late afternoon, the rain eased to a mist. That's when we heard the hoofbeats, first one, then more. I stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Lainey stayed behind the door, watching through the narrow gap. 4 riders came into view, coats dark from the wet. Deputy Cross led them. He raised a hand. "Sheriff," he called. I didn't answer. Behind him, an older man with narrow shoulders and hard eyes spat into the mud. "Mayor says the woman's a fugitive." "She's safe here," I said. "No one's dragging her anywhere." The older man stepped forward. "That a threat?" "It's a fact," I replied. Cross looked back at the others, then returned his gaze to me. "They were going to come with a warrant. I told him not to." "That's your idea of help?" I asked. "It's my idea of stalling," he said. "You've got until morning. After that, they'll come hard. I can't stop it." I gave him a single nod. "I appreciate the warning." "I'm not doing this for you," he said. "I just don't want to see blood on a porch for politics." He turned his horse, and the others followed, their hooves sucking at the wet ground. When they were gone, I stepped back inside and set the rifle by the door. "Tomorrow," I said. Lainey nodded, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. This time, there was no hesitation in her touch. Outside, the rain had all but stopped. The air held that clean, sharp scent that comes after a storm, but we both knew the ground was still soft enough to carry riders in fast. The rain tapered off through the night, leaving the ground soft underfoot, and the air holding that clean scent that comes after a storm. I kept the rifle within reach, moving between the window and the door until the light came. By morning, the clouds had thinned, but the quiet outside felt tight, as if the land itself was waiting. Lainey moved around the cabin without needing to be told, setting the coffee to boil and checking the latch on the back window. Her hands were steadier now, though the red marks at her wrists hadn't yet faded. We ate in near silence, both of us listening for anything beyond the creak of the boards. When the mugs were set aside, I laid the rifles on the table, cleaning each one while she rolled cartridges in strips of cloth. She stored them under a loose board near the hearth, pressing the wood back into place until it sat flush. I checked the shutters, angling one so I could see the road without showing my face. The wind shifted close to midday, bringing the smell of wet pine and churned earth. I stepped outside, scanning the bend in the road. "No riders yet," I said over my shoulder. "No dust trail." She was behind me in the doorway. "I'm not leaving this place," she said. "You can if you want." I shook my head. "I'm not." She didn't answer, but she stayed there until I turned back toward the cabin. "If they come," I told her, "they'll be expecting a scared woman and a soft lawman." She met my eyes. "They'll be wrong." For the rest of the day, we kept busy. I ran oil through the hinges on the back door while she reinforced the latch on the front. She tied a knife under the bench and hung a lantern where it could be lit without catching the window's edge. There wasn't fear in her movements now, just the kind of focus a person finds when they've decided to stand. It was mid-afternoon when the quiet outside changed. The birds went still, and then the sound of hoofbeats carried through the damp air. I stepped onto the porch, the rifle balanced in my hands, but the barrel low. Lainey stood just inside the doorway, her fingers brushing the hilt of the knife she'd tied there. 4 riders came into view, their horses stepping slow in the mud. At the front was Horner, the mayor coat collar turned up against the chill. To his right rode a man I didn't know, broad through the chest, his face cut by an old scar across the bridge of his nose. Horner reined in a dozen paces from the porch. "Morning, Sheriff," he called the words, stretching like he had all day to say them. I didn't move. "You're not welcome out here," I told him. "Figured I'd pay a civil visit," he said, adjusting in the saddle. "Woman you've got inside belongs to the people of Calico Reach. She was charged." "There was no trial," I said. "She had one in the street," he answered. "Same as any woman who lies about a good man." The scarred man swung down from his horse boots, sinking into the mud. "Bring her out," he said flatly. "We don't need to drag this out." I stepped forward one pace, the porch boards creaking under my weight. "She's not going anywhere. You want to come inside my home and try? Go ahead. But you won't leave." Horner's grin tightened. "You're not from here," he said. "You don't know how this place works." I leveled my gaze at him. "I know how justice works. And this isn't it." The scarred man looked to Horner for the word. The mayor hesitated, reading the space between us. That's when Lainey stepped out beside me. She didn't raise her voice. "I won't be silenced again. Not by you. Not by anyone." Horner's jaw flexed. "You're a liar. You slandered a boy's name." She cut him off. "I told the truth. You're afraid of what happens when people start listening." The scarred man's hand twitched toward his gun. I raised the rifle just enough to let him see I was ready. He stopped. One of the townsmen behind Horner shifted in his saddle, and the mayor caught it. "This isn't over," he muttered. "It is for today," I told him. Horner jerked his reins and turned his horse. The others followed, even the scarred man climbing back into the saddle without another word. When the sound of hooves faded into the trees, I lowered the rifle. Lainey hadn't moved. "You all right?" I asked. She nodded, her breath easing out in a slow exhale. "That was the first time I've said it out loud," she said quietly. "What happened? What he did? I thought it would break me." I met her eyes. "You didn't break?" She reached for my hand and I let her. The fire inside was down to coals, the air warmer than it had been in days. But neither of us stepped away. The rest of the afternoon passed without another rider in sight. Still, I kept the rifle close and the door unlatched. The road to town would be soft from the rain, but it wouldn't stay that way forever. Whatever Horner planned next, he'd try to make it quick. As dusk came on, the light thinned and the wind shifted again. The trees beyond the fence swayed, their branches brushing one another with a sound like low voices. Lainey moved through the cabin with a measured calm, setting 2 tin plates on the table, filling them from the pot over the fire. We ate without much talk. The quiet between us was different now, less about waiting, more about knowing where we stood. When the meal was done, I stepped onto the porch. The damp boards gave under my boots. Somewhere to the west, the sky was starting to clear, a thin edge of light cutting through the last of the cloud. Behind me, I heard the soft scrape of her chair, then the sound of her steps coming closer. She stood at the other post, arms crossed against the cool. We didn't speak for a long while, each of us watching the same stretch of dark. Whatever came next, it would come soon. The morning after Horner's visit, the road into town was still wet, and the grass along the fence bent under the weight of leftover rain. I had been awake for hours, sharpening my knife at the table while Lainey moved through the cabin. She set the coffee on to boil and laid out bread and salt pork without me asking. Her movements were quiet but sure, not the cautious steps she'd had the first days here. When we sat to eat, she asked, "You think he's coming back soon?" I didn't look up from my plate. "If he means to, it'll be quick. He won't want word getting around before he's ready." She nodded, tearing a piece of bread and dipping it in the coffee without much thought. The marks on her wrists were fading, but I saw her rub them absent-mindedly. like the memory still itched under the skin. After breakfast, I pulled the rifles from their place by the wall and checked the sights again. Lainey took to sorting the ammunition, rolling cartridges in strips of cloth. We worked without much talk, both of us listening to the faint drip of water from the eaves outside. By mid-morning, the clouds had lifted enough to show a pale line of sky. I stepped out to the porch, looking over the road. Mud still filled the ruts, but a steady wind was starting to dry the top layer. Lainey joined me, holding a tin mug between her hands. "If they ride out here again, it won't just be talk," she said. I glanced at her. "That's why we're ready?" We spent the afternoon shoring up the cabin. I braced the back door with an extra plank, cutting it to fit snug against the frame. Lainey cleared the shelves near the hearth, making space for food and water where we could reach them fast. When I stepped inside from the shed, she was checking the windows again, pushing each latch to be sure it caught. The sun was low when I heard her voice behind me. "I don't want to just wait." I set down the brace I'd been fitting. "You got something in mind?" She hesitated, then said, "If enough people see him for what he is, maybe he won't be able to hold them." I met her eyes. "They already know. They're just afraid to say it." She didn't argue, but I could see her thinking it over. That night, the wind picked up again. I kept to the porch, rifle on my knees, scanning the dark stretch where the road disappeared into the trees. Inside, I could hear her moving, refilling the kettle, folding the blanket on the cot. When she stepped into the doorway, her face was in shadow. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said. "If they come, I'll be here beside you." I nodded once. "All right." By morning, the air had turned cold and sharp. We ate quick bread and strong coffee, then checked the rifles again. The sky stayed clear through midday, but the quiet outside felt heavier than before. When the hoofbeats came, they were slow, deliberate, each one carrying in the still air. I stepped to the porch, Lainey just behind the door. 4 riders came into view, not the same group as before. Horner wasn't with them. At the front was Deputy Cross. He reined in short of the fence. "They're coming at first light," he said. "More men than before. I can't stop it." I didn't answer right away. "Then we'll be ready," I said finally. His jaw tightened, but he gave a small nod before turning his horse. When the sound of them faded, I went back inside. Lainey was already moving toward the shelves, setting food and water where we could reach them. I took my place by the window, looking out at the bend in the road. The last of the light was sinking behind the ridge, and the air carried the kind of stillness that comes before a break. "Tomorrow, then," I said. She looked over her shoulder at me. "Tomorrow." We kept working until the fire was the only light in the room, the shadows reaching long across the floor. Neither of us said more, but the space between us felt set like a line drawn and agreed upon. The air was heavy before dawn, the kind of weight that told you a day wasn't going to pass quiet. I'd been up since the first stretch of gray along the horizon, running the sight on my rifle again and checking the cartridges we'd set aside. Lainey moved through the cabin without asking what needed doing. She boiled water for coffee, then stacked kindling by the hearth until it was enough to last the day. We ate bread and salt pork in near silence. She didn't ask if they were coming. Neither of us had to. When the last of the coffee was gone, I pushed back from the table and crossed to the window. The road was still the bend, half hidden by the trees. "Won't be long," I said. She stepped up beside me, close enough that I could see the steadiness in her face. By mid-morning, the birds had gone quiet. That was the first sign. Then came the hoofbeats, 3, maybe 4 horses moving slow and deliberate. I stepped onto the porch, my hand on the rifle, but the barrel low. Lainey stayed in the doorway, her fingers resting on the edge of the frame. Horner was at the front, riding tall in the saddle with 2 townsmen and that scar-faced hand beside him. They stopped 20 paces out. Morning Sheriff Horner called. I didn't move. You're not welcome here, I told him. I'm here for what's mine, he said, nodding toward the cabin. That woman's a fugitive. She was chained without trial, I said. We settle that in court. The scarred man swung down from his horse boots, sinking in the soft ground. Bring her out, he said. No need to make this harder. I stepped forward, the porch board creaking under my boot. She's not going anywhere. You want to try, you won't leave. Horner's grin thinned. You don't know how we keep order here, he said. I know what justice looks like, I answered. Laney stepped out, then standing even with me. I won't be silenced again, she said. Horner's jaw worked. You're a liar, he spat. I told the truth, she said. And you're afraid of it. The scarred man's hand went for his gun, but I lifted the rifle before he cleared leather. He froze. The townsmen shifted uneasily in their saddles. Horner read it and jerked his reins. This isn't over, he muttered. It is for today, I said. They turned and rode back the way they'd come. When the sound of them faded, I lowered the rifle. Laney's breath eased out slow. First time I've said it in front of him, she murmured. Thought it would break me. I looked at her. You didn't break. She reached for my hand. I let her. The rest of the day we stayed close to the cabin. I cleaned the rifles again, and she set food where we could get to it fast. We didn't talk much, but the quiet wasn't uneasy anymore. It was the kind of stillness you get when both people know their part. That evening I saddled my horse. I'm riding in, I told her. Won't be long. She came to the porch, eyes searching mine. You sure that's safe? No, I said. But it's needed. She didn't try to stop me. Calico Reach looked much the same from a distance, but once I rode in, I caught the changes. Conversations cut off as I passed. The saloon doors stayed shut. The mayor's office was dark. I tied my horse outside the sheriff's office and stepped in. Deputy Cross looked up from the desk. You're alive, he said. For now, I answered. He came around the desk, hands resting on his belt. You shouldn't be here. I stood steady. That's why I came. We looked at each other a long moment before I asked, Is the mayor planning something else? Cross hesitated. He's quiet, too quiet. But people aren't backing him like before. Word's spreading about her about what happened. I gave a slow nod. Then, he's already losing. Cross didn't argue. I left before the sun dropped too low, riding back while there was still light to see the bends in the road. Laney was on the porch when I came into view, sitting on the steps with a bowl in her lap. When she saw me, she stood. You didn't take long, she said. They're not sure what to do now, I told her. Horner's losing ground. She set the bowl aside and we stood on the porch a while, just watching the last of the light fade. Tomorrow might bring something new. Tonight we had the stillness. It was near dusk when Deputy Cross rode out to the cabin. His horse was wet along the neck dust, clinging to its legs. He swung down without a word, at first tying the reins to the porch rail. Laney stepped out beside me, the lantern light catching the edge of her hair. They're calling a town meeting, Cross said. Horner's pushing for it. Claims it's to restore order. I knew what that meant. A public hearing without a judge, just the mayor and whoever he could rally. When I asked, 2 days, he said. They'll hold it in front of the courthouse. He's telling folks you won't show. Laney's fingers tightened around the porch post. He wants me there, she said. So he can turn the crowd. Cross nodded. He's betting you won't speak or that they won't believe you if you do. I looked at her. We'll be there, I told him. Both of us. After Cross left, we sat at the table with the map spread between us. The road into Calico Reach was narrow enough to watch for trouble. We ride in early, I said. Before the crowd gathers. Gives them less time to stir up talk. She agreed, though I could see the strain in her eyes. The next 2 days passed without a sign from Horner or his men. Still, the air felt close, like the town itself was holding its breath. I kept to the cabin, working the rifle stock with a cloth until it was smooth in my hands. Lainey baked bread, her movements steady, but her gaze often far away. On the morning of the meeting, the sun was only a pale line over the hills when we saddled the horses. Lainey wore the same plain dress she'd arrived in, her hair tied back neat. "Ready?" I asked. "As I'll ever be," she said. The ride-in was quiet. A few riders passed us going the same way, glancing back now and then but saying nothing. By the time we reached the main street, folks were already gathering. The courthouse steps were draped with bunting, though the colors looked faded. Horner stood at the top, talking low, with a scar-faced hand. When he saw us, his smile tightened. "Well, well," he called. "Didn't think you'd come." I didn't answer. We stopped at the foot of the steps. The crowd shifted, voices low. Horner raised his hands. "We're here today because law has been mocked," he said. "Because a woman—" "That woman is here to speak for herself," I cut in. Heads turned toward Lainey. She stepped forward, her voice clear. "I was taken without charge, held without cause. And I'm not the only one." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Horner barked a laugh. "Lies," he said. "Nothing but—" He stopped when she kept going. "Ask your mayor why he never called for a judge. Ask him where the others went." Her words landed heavy. Folks began looking at one another instead of him. The scarred man moved like he might come down the steps, but I shifted my rifle just enough for him to see. He stopped cold. Horner's jaw worked. "You think you've won," he said low. "You've just made it worse for yourself." "We'll see," I told him. When we rode out, the crowd didn't part for him, they parted for us. That told me more than any words could. Lainey was quiet until we cleared the last buildings. "I didn't shake," she said softly. "Not once." I glanced over at her. "That's because you've already faced worse." We reached the cabin before sundown. The sky was deepening to purple when we heard the faint beat of a single horse coming up the trail. A rider dark against the horizon, heading straight for us. The rider slowed as he neared the porch, the dusk light stretching his shadow long across the yard. It was Judge Wallace's coat collar turned up against the evening chill. He swung down stiffly, tying his horse to the rail. "Got your telegram?" he said, eyes shifting from me to Lainey. "Sounds like Horner's been running his own court." I nodded. "We've got witnesses, Judge, and plenty willing to speak." He gave a short nod. "Then we'll hear them proper. Tomorrow. Inside the courthouse with the law behind it." At first light, we rode in together. This time, there was no bunting, no staged crowd. The benches were full, but folks sat quiet watching as Wallace called each witness. Cross spoke first, then 2 ranch hands who'd seen the locked rooms behind Horner's office. Lainey told her piece without wavering, the words plain and steady. When Horner took the stand, his smooth talk fell flat. Wallace read off the charges, his voice carrying clear to the back wall. Misuse of office, unlawful detention, threats against citizens. Horner's hands clenched on the rail. By the time the gavel struck, the mayor's badge was on the table, and the sheriff was leading him out. Outside, the air smelled of dust and sunlight. Folks came up to shake Lainey's hand, some murmuring apologies. She met each one with the same quiet grace. Cross tipped his hat. "Town'll remember this," he said. I knew he was right. Back at the cabin, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like slow water. Lainey set her small bundle of things on the table. "I could ride on," she said, "but I think I'd rather stay." I told her the door would always be open. The weeks that followed were quieter. Cattle drives passed on the far ridge, the telegraph clicking in town, carrying news from miles away. Life settled into a rhythm, work, small talk over coffee, the occasional trip to the trading post. Looking back, I reckon justice out here isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just standing your ground long enough for the truth to breathe. It's knowing when to speak and when to let silence say the rest. If you've listened this far, maybe you've seen some of your own roads in ours. Out here, we keep moving forward, dust on our boots, sun on our backs, grateful for the company we find along the way.